Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Hi, Keith.
Hi.
Welcome. This is great. I just want to let you know we have lots of people streaming in, so please say hello and go ahead and tell us where you're from. We have people from California, Escondido. We have Los Angeles, Ipswich, Massachusetts, Metro Boston, Corvallis, Oregon, Westchester, Pennsylvania, so many more. Northern Idaho, Northwest Colorado, Glasgow. There you go. Ohio. Ooh, Denman Island, Tastaic, the traditional and unceded territory of the Comox First Nation and many other Coast Salish peoples on the west coast of British Columbia. That's quite impressive there.
That's a new one. That's a new one.
Wow, that's a lot. Vancouver, Port St. Lucie, good job. Florida, love that. Swedesboro, New Jersey. I'm in actually Sweden, so that's good. Vista, California. Somebody just saying, yo, sup. So, well, yo, sup with you. I'm from Indonesia. Sarasota, nice. Nuneaton, UK. Oh my gosh, we're just going to keep flooding in. I'm going to get started here, folks. Houston, Florida. Please keep saying where you're from and say hello. I hope you can all connect here. Florida coast, Canada, Gloucestershire in UK, Southern California, and so many more. So again, I just want to tell you a little bit about what's happening today, and we will make it happen. So again, make sure you sign up and join us. I want to talk today about the industry changes that have made it one of the best times in the history to be an author, but it's one of the most confusing times, and that's why we're here today with all the different publishing options that are available. We're going to discuss this, and in the session of First Editing's Publishing Power, we have Author Learning Center's president, Keith Ogorek, to review the 4 primary publishing paths and explain the benefits and challenges of each of these in depth. So learn the basics of do-it-yourself from general contractor, supported self-publishing, and traditional publishing and more. We're going to look at the options, what they're different from one another, your responsibility and control with each, and which path is going to be best for you, your budget, and your book. So all of these choices is why I started this channel and podcast, and I want to help authors like you today to navigate through the process of publishing after editing. I'm your host, Joella Nordstrom. I'm an editor, not a publisher, a lifelong student, entrepreneur, and certified story coach for authors. I'm also the founder of First Editing and the Publishing Power podcast channel. It's a growing community that's going to help people like you figure out how to self-edit and then competently work with a professional editor. We're here today to talk editing and what happens next. We'll discuss your strengths, your challenges, and your plans for publishing. I'd like to show you how you can proudly take charge of editing and publishing to build your confidence instead of wandering in the dark asking yourself, is my book and my writing any good? I credit our thousands of published authors with the expertise, skills, and process of our team of editors who are vetted, certified, and subject matter experts. And you know what? I see editing and publishing success on the horizon for you too. So without further ado, a shiny new episode is starting now. I hope you will subscribe to our YouTube channel and community of authors. Sign up for our newsletter over at firstediting.com, where you can also get a free editing sample and a critique of your manuscript. My purpose is to help you and to always show you who you are as a writer and then transform you into the published author that you desire. So in the millions of writers who visited our website, I've never met a single author who could not benefit from learning to edit. Not one. So editing is knowledge, and knowledge empowers you to complete your publishing journey. So for all these reasons, I'm delighted to introduce you to Keith Ogorek of the Author Learning Center. Good afternoon, Keith. Today's topic is the 4 paths to publishing. Woohoo! Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Joellen, and love your enthusiasm as always. And so delighted to be here and just excited to hear that we have people literally from all over the globe and from places I've never even heard of. I'm sitting actually in Indianapolis, right in the center of the country. But I just love the fact that we're going to be able to help people who in some ways are the same people because they all have a book in them that they want to get out and get it out as well as they can. And secondly, that they're different though, because each of their projects is unique And one of the things I love about what you said is there is no book that doesn't need to be edited, right? And
Oh,
that's one of the most important things that you can do to put your best product out there. But as you get your book ready to go, what I want to help people figure out is how do I put my book into the marketplace based on what my goals are and what my budget is and things like that. So we'll walk through some of those details.
oh, this is going to be fun, and I mean, it's pretty easy to go through this when you know what you're doing, but if it's new to you, it is quite a labyrinth. So I'm glad we can talk through this today. Before we get started, let me introduce Keith properly. As an industry thought leader, Keith Ogorek has helped drive a number of significant innovations in the self-publishing industry and is featured in the book Innovation: How Innovators Think, Act, and Change Our World. Keith has helped launch and operate supported self-publishing imprints for traditional publishers, and FuseFrame, which identifies and options self-published books for the development in Hollywood. So Keith has authored 3 books and is working on a 4th. Woo-hoo! He's written a number of helpful white papers, including the popular 4 Paths to Publishing and 3 Phases of an Effective Book Marketing Campaign. So you also find him speaking at events in LA, in California Creative Writers Conference, Singapore's Writers Festival, Havana Book Fair, and the Florida Writers Conference. In addition, he's a regular webinar presenter for the Author Learning Center. And Keith, I want to be honest, when you're going to all of those different conferences, it sounds like you're going to warm, nice places.
Yes, that is part. I've never spoken in Minnesota or Sweden because I want to go somewhere. Want to go somewhere where it's warm. And I will tell you, obviously, the pandemic slowed all
Oh,
that down. But I was back. I spoke at the first conference, the Greater Los Angeles Writer Society, in August, and it was just delightful to be together in person. And just again, there's an energy when authors and creative people are in a room. I mean, it's work because you have to go through the process of presenting, but man, is it fun just to be with people like we have on this podcast today, because it's just so much fun to be around people like that.
oh, I miss people, humanity, IRL, in real life, all of that fun stuff. But you know, we're surviving. We're getting through there. It's
Yep.
I don't want to be too optimistic and say we're post pandemic, but that's what they're saying. So I
Yep.
really hope it's true. I really,
Yep.
really do.
Yep. I do as
Excellent.
well.
Well, we have a bunch of things to talk about today, and you were talking about those 4 different paths. So I've outlined a couple of questions. We are going to keep it short and sweet. We'll go directly to the heart of what we want to talk about. It. I do want to remind everyone that we have a free replay after each live webinar. So, and if you need that, if for some reason you don't get it in our emails sent out to you, if you're joining us on live on one of our streams, we're on Twitter right now, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, and we're on LinkedIn Live. So we're all pumping it out there. The way to go. You can also contact us at editors@firstediting.com. We'll gladly send you a replay of this episode so that you can enjoy on that. So I'm going to show our questions that I have for you today, Keith, up on the screen. And we'll start with our first one here. So you said that it's now is the best time to be an author, and it's also most confusing. And we kind of mentioned that in the intro, but why do you think that this is true?
Well, let me tell you the moment of inspiration actually for this, and in doing that, I may answer that question. So a few years ago, quite a few years ago, I was actually on a panel at a writers conference, and just like we're going to do here after we're done with what I'm going to say, we're going to open it up maybe to some questions. They opened it up to questions, and this one woman walked up to the microphone, and she didn't even ask a question. She just was in an exasperated tone said, "What am I missing?" And that's when I realized that while there used to be only one path to publishing, which was traditional, and you had to get an agent, and it was very clear what you had to do, and you also had to endure a lot of rejection usually, and you might never get to your goal of being a published author. Now there were multiple paths, but how to navigate those paths and which one was going to be best for your project was very difficult for people to discern. So the next opportunity I had to speak, the very things we're going to talk about, I started to say, well, I think there's 4 paths and identify these paths. And over the years, it's just been very helpful to help people understand first what their choices are, and then second of all, to equip them as to what would be the best choice for their project. And the key thing in that is, number one, there isn't the one right answer for everyone. One of
Mm,
the things that I do is sometimes I'll be on panels and people will have a specific idea that they think the only way to publish is to do this or to only do
mm,
this. And I actually don't take that perspective. And the second thing is, you might choose one path for one of your books, and you may have a different project and you may choose a different path for that, which is why I say it's the best time to be an author, because if you're equipped and you understand what your choices are and what your project is, you can make the best choice for that project. And I
mm.
think that's why it's the best time to be an author.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's great because there is so much available out there, but the more we know, the less we know is kind of how it goes. So it's
Yeah.
really good to break it down. And of course, the first time through, it's always a big way, but it can get easier and it gets easier and easier. So most of our writers are very prolific. We have them coming back again and again. So I hope that this will get them on the path of confidence and understanding and knowledge there. So um, others have more options than ever to get published, but you've identified the four distinct paths for us. So, can you tell us exactly what are the four paths to publishing? And if you can, walk us through how they're different.
Yeah, that's actually a really clear. There are four clear paths. The first one is what I call DIY, where
Mhm,
you just do everything yourself. And you now have that opportunity to upload your cover, format your book, and do everything yourself. And what I tell people, if you're going to do that, you need to be really confident in your skills.
mm,
And so you want to make sure that if you've never designed a book cover, that your book is not your first one, because we've seen some pretty hideous covers out there. But you do have the opportunity to do that. The second option is what I call the general contractor path.
mhm,
And that is where you don't do everything yourself, but you use resources that you can easily avail yourself of to make sure that you put out the best product possible. So you might choose to work with an organization like yours in first editing to make sure that your book is edited. And then you
mhm,
could find a cover designer, and then you could get your ISBN, and you can use different distribution methods to put it out. And you can decide whether you want to do an ebook or a print book. So basically it's you're not doing everything yourself, which frankly I don't advise people to do that, because you're going to need an editor and you're going to need a book designer, so you coordinate those tasks yourself. So
mhm,
that's the first two paths. The third path is what we call supported or assisted self-publishing, and that's where you work with one company that has all the services that you possibly could want and need to get your book done. And
mm,
so, an easy way to think about this is it's like making and eating a meal. So, making and eating a meal, DIY is like making and eating a meal at home. So, it's
mm,
dependent on what you have in your pantry or your refrigerator and how good you are as a cook. And what I always say is, if you're going to come over to our house to dinner, make sure you find out if my wife's cooking or if I'm cooking, because you'll get two different outcomes, right? Same thing with DIY. General contractor is like going to a deli. There, you've relied on someone else's time and talent and resources to prepare options for you. You're still in control, and your dollar investment will probably be a little bit greater than if you make meals at home, but you might get a better outcome in terms of what you have as choices and what the food tastes like.
mm,
Supported self publishing is like going to a restaurant. You have a menu of items that you can choose from, and you're in control of what you spend. You can spend $30 on dinner, or you can spend $300 on dinner. But most importantly, you're the one who's choosing, and you're being provided service to make sure that everything's taken care of. So, just as you think about that analogy, you're probably going to have a greater investment of time making and eating a meal, and you're probably going to have a greater investment of dollars in working in or eating in a restaurant. So it's not one or the other is better or worse. It's just they're different based on what you're trying to accomplish. Then the fourth path I referenced earlier, that's the traditional publishing. And that's the one that most people are most familiar with and they probably aspire to. And that is where you need to get an agent in most cases. and then you approach a traditional publisher. And what you do in that, and what differentiates it from the first three, which are all self-publishing, is you assign your rights to someone. So
Mm.
that that's a different path, and it's not wrong or right. And for some people, it's the best path for them, and it's what they aspire to. And I think the most important thing, which I think is oftentimes a misperception out there, is some people say, well, if you self-publish, then you can never picked up by a traditional publisher. I would say 10 years ago that was probably true.
Yeah.
Not anymore. Traditional publishers are constantly looking for self-published authors that have a really well-written book and have started to build a platform and build an audience, and they'll absolutely pick that up. So, and that's the most important thing. No matter which path you choose, make sure you write and edit and design the best book you can possibly put out there.
Exactly, exactly. It's just being prepared, and it is a little interesting to know that the rights and how the ownership of your book is always a good question whenever you're engaging with anyone to make sure you know exactly how that's dealt with because you know that is of course your baby, so you want
Right.
to know who owns it and what can happen, and it can be difficult. There are horror stories out there, but then there's also those wonderkins who've come out of nowhere. They were self-publishing and then poof, off they
Right.
went. So that's the advantage of having been around the last 15, 20 years of all of this, the very beginnings and then the huge wave of self-publishing and all the differences that are out there. And I would mention that, you know, artificial intelligence and the softwares that are out there combined with the knowledge that we're getting even as general editors is creating a huge difference in the quality and but not only that it'll help you better with your quality but it's also more competitive overall, so you really need to approach whatever path works for you.
Right.
And so that's a little difficult, and as you said it can be different in different times. So let's move on to our third question here. So we have a lot of options, and how do we know which is the best option? Because I get these same questions like, okay, you have different levels of editing, and I go again. Those are basic, And for me, it's right here. It's easy.
Right.
So I'm going to ask you, what's the best option for their
Right.
book project in layman's terms?
Right. So I think one of the key things is the first three that I mentioned: the DIY, the general contractor, and supported self-publishing. Um, they differentiate themselves from traditional publishing in this way. As an author, you control the content,
Mm,
um, and you control speed to market.
right.
And those are two very important things. When you decide to work with a traditional publisher, they may change the title of your book, they may change the cover, they may ask for another edit or another chapter, and
Hmm.
um, and so uh, again, that's neither good nor bad. It's just a decision you have to make. And then a lot of times they will acquire a book, even if it's self-published or a manuscript. And I would suspect that if we talk to traditional publishers right now, they're working on books that they're going to put out in 2024.
Yeah,
Their 23 list is already done.
it's
So your
full.
book might not make it to the market to 2024, right? And
Mm,
so that's important. So one of the things that I always say to authors is when you're trying to make your decision, be clear on this. What's your goal? What's your budget?
mm,
And what time and talent can you bring to the project?
right.
And so as you think about those and you balance those, you can make the best decision. And what the two scariest things I ever hear from authors, and I've heard these more than once, is my goal is to reach every man, woman, and child on the planet. And while I appreciate the aspiration, it's unrealistic. And the
Right.
second thing that I hear that scares me is my daughter is an artist, because that almost
Yeah.
always means the book cover is not going to be very good. And I've heard those, and I've seen examples. So you want to set realistic goals about what you want to accomplish with your book.
Mm,
And one of the questions that I always enjoy asking authors is, how many people would you have to impact with your book and reach with your book to make you feel like it was worth it? And in all the years I've been asking those questions, that question at all the different conferences I've gone to, no one's ever given me a number bigger than 100. Like the reality is that we would love to be a New York Times bestseller and all that, but most of us know that that's probably pretty far reaching, right?
mm,
But the value of becoming an author is because you have the opportunity to impact lives of people that you may never meet. And that's such a great thing. So as you, and what I encourage people to do is write down what your goals are, and write
Mm,
down and be realistic about what time and talent. So I'm a writer. I've written books. I've written a lot of things. So I don't have a problem writing a manuscript, but I'm not an editor. And this
mm,
book I'm working on right now, you'll appreciate this, Joelle. This book I'm working on right now, we went through 20 versions of the manuscript before we even submitted it to an editor. I have a co-author. He's
mm,
never written a book before. We got it back from the editor, and it was she just did a fabulous job. But it looked like, if you didn't have context, you're just like, oh my gosh, I've just wasted all this time. So I had to explain that no, everything that she's doing it was just so good and so helpful. And the book is far better because of that. And some of it was punctuation and things, but some of it was suggestions, like you could do this and make this. And so anyway, so I recognize that in myself. And we even had beta readers who were English teachers and things like that, but it's not the same. And then second of all, I would never design my cover,
no.
because I would never do that. And so that's where I said you have to be realistic about your the time and talent that you can bring to something. And then your budget, right?
Mm,
Don't sell a car or give blood or something. Like, do what you can, because it is the best time to be an author. You can do things simply, and there
mm,
are resources that you can tap. And
mm,
one of the things that we do with the Author Learning Center, and this is where I love doing this with you, because I think we share the same mission, that our goal is to educate people so that they can be confident that they're making the best decision. And so, um, if you're realistic about your goals and
mm,
the time and talent you can bring to it, and then the budget you have, you can find solutions to do things that are really really important. And most importantly, get your book out into the hands of readers. Because one of the things I always say is, I don't know how many people you will impact if you publish your book, but I know how many will you will if you don't. And the most important reason to publish your book is because you'll have the opportunity to impact people's lives. You might sell some books too, but that's not actually the most important reason. So
no.
hopefully that's helpful and clarifying for people.
Yeah, sure. And I love the fact that you're talking about, what is your purpose? Because, even as an editor, when you come in, that's our questions there, especially if you're working with nonfiction versus fiction. When you're doing fiction, you're telling a story, and we're looking at the story arc and the plot and the characters and the scenes. But when you get into that nonfiction world, well, what is your purpose here? Is it your call to actions? Are you trying to use this as a lead generator? Are you trying to inspire, motivate, educate, whatever it may be? And are you speaking directly to them? So really, really, really always going back to that foundation of, why are you writing it, and who are you writing it for, so that your editor and this author learning center is a community that allows you to discuss with others and understand better. Okay, am I really serving the reader? Am I really getting this through? And which method is going to get it in the hands of the people that I need to be on my list, or whatever
Right.
that may be. So it's
So
very, very important.
yeah, so one of the joys I have is, I said, to speak at conferences and do things like this. And so, I talk to people that are across the whole spectrum of publishing experience and goals and stuff. And one of the things I always like to say is, someone say, well, I'm just writing this for my family. And 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 I always say to them, there's no reason you should bore your family to death. Like, even if you're just writing it to you, like, they almost give themselves that as an excuse to write a bad book. And I'm like, no, you still need to get it edited. And there's no reason, just because you think your audience is 20 people, why would you want to bore your grandkids? Like, write the best book you possibly can and get it edited. And even if it is for that, then that's your legacy. That's your there's a guy, Alan Jacobs, that I love. He said books have a long afterlife, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I just love that quote, right? Books have a
Mm,
long afterlife, because so even if you're on this podcast and you're thinking, well, I'm just writing this for a small audience, still, even if it's just your family, put the best book out there that you can. There's no reason to bore your family.
Mhm. Okay. And we had a question here. So if you
Yeah,
don't mind, I'll bring them in
yeah,
as we go. So this
yeah,
encourages
sure.
people to go ahead and go along. And I'm sorry if I didn't get to this a little faster, but we have here with supported self-publishing, who is actually listed as the publisher is a question here. So I'd love for you to go ahead and answer him.
Yeah, so whatever in supported self-publishing, you're typically working with a company that has ISBNs, which is the international
Standard book
it's
number.
yeah, standard book number, but it's how the books are tracked through the system, both from a sales standpoint and a royalty standpoint. So when you work with them, but the key is some people get confused. Just because the publisher has the ISBN and they're listed as a publisher, you still own the content. I mean,
Mm,
Joellen made this point earlier, but most of the agreements, if it's a legit company, like if tomorrow in best case, let's say a traditional publisher you self-published through a supported self-publishing company, a traditional publisher called and said, hey, I want your book. You just call up and you cancel because it's your content, and then they pull that
mm,
book out of distribution. The traditional publisher takes it over. So that's the publisher. And again, I think that that will or will not matter depending on if you're trying to build your brand. If you're Tony Robbins, right, or someone like that. But the reality is when's the last time that you read a book that you liked and you flipped it over to see who the publisher is, or that usually the way books spread is word of mouth. That's the first thing. And rarely do people say, oh, well, that book isn't, that book was published by someone else. It wasn't published by Joellen, therefore I'm not going to buy it.
right.
I think that's where hopefully that's clarifying, because I think that's where people get confused. Even if they're the publisher and it's their name on it, you still own the content. It just allows them to be able to track royalties to pay you royalties.
Right. And I think, there are always different personalities involved in
Yeah.
these. There are some people who just say, here, take this, fix it, publish
Yeah.
it, edit it, do
Right.
whatever, write it,
Right.
make it for me.
Right.
And then there's those who are going to be really weary and the trust factor is
Yeah.
a different
Yeah.
level. So read the contract, read the
Right.
fine print, do that so that because we can't advise you individually on every single one. And this is a very general, wide covering that we're talking about today. But read how it works. And, there's plenty of research. And in today's world, the internet will lead you to a lot of places and find out
Yeah.
a lot of information if you want to
Yeah.
sit and go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay. Now I have a question here. What are these resources? And I'm wondering these resources. I'm not sure.
Oh, when I say, I think what I said is, I think what I said is, to make your decision, you want to be clear on your goal, your budget, your time and talent and resources that you're bringing
Mm,
to the project. And so
exactly.
resources is, if you know an editor, right? If you have the resources to find first editing or something like that, that's resources you can bring.
Hmm.
If you don't either have the knowledge of people in the industry to do that, or you don't have the time to research it and you don't want to, then you might work with a supported self-publishing company where all the resources are in one place. That's why I said you have to be clear on what time and talent you're bringing and what resources you're bringing, because that's why it can be confusing. Is I can find editing, I can find book design, I can find all of that, or if I just don't want to mess with it, or I don't have the time, then I can work with the supported self-publishing. So that's what I mean by resources, because regardless of which path you choose, you're still going to have to make some decisions. Like, to get to a finished book that's published, you still have to go through the same process. It's just a question of whether you're going to do it, whether you're going to hire people to do it, or whether you're going to work with one company that will do it for you. That's really what it comes down to by resources.
Okay. All right. So then the response to that, and I see all your questions here. So please feel free to keep bringing them in, folks. We'll hit them as best as we can as we go through this. There was a follow up on that this particular person says. I think he was talking about the second option. So what are the resources to choose from?
Yeah.
And so yeah, and
Yeah, so let me just so one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that you have to have editing. So what resources are you going to use for editing, right? What resources are you going to use for cover design? if you're going to do the second path, which is general contractor, you're going to need to get an ISBN, and you're going to have to choose a distribution method. And you
Mhm.
have options like Ingram, or you have options like Lulu, or KDP, or things like that. Um, Depending on the nuances of your book, the book I'm working on right now, there was some artwork, and so I had to find a guy that could help me with rights to
Right.
to acquire the rights to have certain artwork. And then it's a nonfiction book, so there's a bibliography, and I'll be honest, I just didn't want to mess with it. It's the most grueling part. So we hired someone to just do the bibliography, right?
Right.
Which was a limited scope, and that was different than hiring someone to edit, right? Which is
Right.
a different scope. And then you just have to make a number of decisions and resources, but you have to go through all the same steps. And again, that's what we try to do on the Author Learning Center, is to create. We have something called a book launch tool, which gives you tasks that you need to think about in writing, editing, publishing, and marketing. And so we suggest tasks, but your project may have special things. Like, I've never had to worry about arts rights before, so I had to figure that out. And I'm a
Right.
little bit at an advantage because of where I work and
Mm.
in the industry, but I still had never done it before, and so it was a whole new world. And that's what I think you need to think through. What resources do I need to bring this book to fruition?
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it's a lot of stuff, and if you've got, connections or information or knowledge or experience, that's totally different from walking in the blue.
right,
But it's also, if you have connections with other people who've been through the process, then it's
right.
also quite reassuring to discuss that and to go through it. So that's kind of why we're here. I mean, we get everybody as they're coming down through.
Right.
They start up here writing, and then they come down, and then they're editing, and then as they go into publishing, it gets very specific in your genre and your audience and things like that. So connecting with other people who are in uh, the same level of the publishing process, in the same
Right.
area of the journey, really helps. And also those who've been there before you can, hopefully
Right.
they pave the way. So let's
Right.
see here. I did have one person here, and I'm just going to bring this up, and then we'll kind of talk to it as we go. Oh, there's a lot of questions coming here. So um, she asks us to get very specific about each of the four paths. So as I have a couple more questions for you. We can knock those down, I believe, as we go.
Um, well, the four paths, and there is a handout I think we're going to put out. The four paths, I'll
Yes.
repeat them. I don't know. DIY is where you just do everything yourself.
Mhm.
You use an upload tool. You can use KDP, or you can use Lulu. A formatting tool, and
Mhm.
you can either bring
Kobo.
in a yeah, Kobo. Yeah, there's a lot of things like that that you can upload. So that's DIY, and you basically are in charge of it. General contractor is just like it is if you're building a house. You don't do everything yourself, but you hire people who are experts in the particular needs that you have to be able to get your project done. So you'll hire a cover designer, and you'll hire an editor, and you might hire someone to actually just do the upload or do the book design and figure out how to do that. And then supported self-publishing is where you work with one company that has all those resources. So it's almost like a one-stop shop. And
Mm.
I think I mean, those are the specifics, I think, of how each path works. And then traditional publishing is where you work with a publisher that you'll assign the rights, but you're going to need an agent. And agents will
Mhm.
be very specific about how to approach them, either through a query letter or a book proposal. And then they'll approach the traditional publishers and try and get you a contract. And as I said, none of those paths are good or bad. It's just, what do you want to do, and what are the things that you can bring to the project. So hopefully
Right,
that
yeah.
answers that.
And
Yeah.
a part of that is budget. I mean,
Right.
budget of time, budget of money, budget of knowledge, for someone like myself, budget of patience.
Yeah.
Really, I'm just made that way. I was like, please. And so it's really the personality. Those who are do-it-yourselfers, they can, and it will take longer. They'll come out of it very knowledgeable, but it will take much longer. And one of the interesting things you talked about earlier was how fast you can get it to market, the marketing in itself. That's a very big thing. Everybody wants to have the traditional publisher quite often, because it comes with the status and things like that. But it's not always the best story. Your book can get sunk, can just, you
Right.
may get paid and they may not see it, but
Right.
there's lots of stories out there. So
Right.
all right, let's see here. Moving along, let me get back to my questions. And folks, I'm going to come back to your questions, so don't leave us. Just want to carry on. We've got plenty of time here. So my next question is, when publishing a book, what should the author pay attention to as they're going through the process? What's specific that they need to be paying out, keeping their eyes and ears open for?
So, first of all, you had touched on this. Read the contract if you're going to work with even freelancers or vendors or
Yeah.
however. Just read the contract. Make sure that's very clear on who owns the content, what the deliverables are, what the
Hmm.
termination is if they don't fulfill their promises.
Hmm.
How the money flows. Are you paying everything up front? Are you paying things in installments? All of that's very, very important. And I will tell you that largely my experience in the author community and services community is people are just great. Now,
Hmm.
just like in every business, there are scammers out there.
Hmm.
And so you just need to be careful, right? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is I would say uh, start out with a goal to put out the best book you can possibly put out with the resources that you have. And
Hmm.
so if there's one thing that I would do is that I would make sure I got a book edited. I would never put a book out. One of the books that I've self-published is a children's book I did based on
Hmm.
a story that I told my daughters when they were very young. And they just said, Dad, you need to do that. And so I
Hmm.
did. And I think it's 2,200 words or 2,600 words, and I got it edited. And I just thought, there's no way this editor's going to find anything, right? It's 2,600
Oh.
words. I've told this story a million times. I had my daughters read it, my wife, and sure enough, the editor found some stuff. And so that's the one thing I think that people think, everyone thinks they're a one draft wonder. They're not. So that's something I think you need to pay attention to. Uh, a third thing I would say to pay attention to is your title. Don't
Hmm.
be provocative for provocative's sake. Some people like to be provocative, or they just have a generic title. I've never seen a book or an author that their first title is the one that they should end up with on their book.
Hmm.
And I've encouraged authors to keep writing. They always get a better title down the road, just like you get a better book if you write multiple drafts. But
Hmm.
think about your titles, because your title is your first marketing decision.
Right.
And I've seen people try to be provocative for the sake of being provocative, and I have no idea what the book's about.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of things, and then also think about your cover design. Whether you
Oh.
work with someone yourself or whether you have the capability or you work with a company. Again, there's a lot of good information out there on the Author Learning Center and other places about thinking about your cover design. And a lot of times people think about their cover design when they think about it as a print book. But in this day and age, you really need to think about, what does your cover look like when it's a thumbnail on someone's phone? Because that's how a lot of people search for books, right?
Yeah.
And then equally, you need to think about what your back cover copy is, which is your book blurb.
Yeah.
Don't just drone on about what your book is about. Say something that's interesting, that pulls me in to why I would want to read this book. What am I going to get from this book, or what's interesting about the character, or something like that. And those are things I think that, regardless of what path you choose, by taking the time to make good decisions along the way, you'll have a better opportunity to be successful with whatever your goals are, but also you'll be confident that you're putting your best book out there that you possibly can.
Right, right. And the blurb is so important, not only for yourself, but for the editor. And when it comes down to that, after you have the working blurb, when you get to the end for your back cover, that's always fun to does it follow a story arc? Does it pull us in, create a little attention, make us wonder what's going on, leave us with the cliffhanger and wanting more? So there's all kinds of interesting things there that really is so important, and it's the tiniest little detail. So,
Yeah, and
oh,
so if you think about when someone just walk into a bookstore and watch what someone does, they pull it off the shelf, and the first
mm,
thing they do is they turn it over.
of course.
And so what I always say is, your title is your first marketing decision, but your book cover is your second marketing decision. And you have all
Right.
this other things that you can do from a marketing campaign standpoint. But if you have an uninteresting title, or you have a book cover that just doesn't make sense,
No.
or the book blurb doesn't draw me in,
Mm.
they're never going to get to the gist of it, no matter how good the book is. And so too often I think people spend a lot of time focused on the manuscript without really thinking through those things, or they go in with the title and they're just in love with that title. But you can always write a better title. And
Mm.
I've got lots of examples of authors who thought they just had this winner, and I said, well, here, just push, 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 and they get to a much better title, and they're so much happier when they go to market with that title.
Right, right. So we have a question here I'd like to show
Okay.
here. Uh, so her question here is from Janice. Is there a difference between self-publishing and independent publishing? Because we're talking about these 4 different variations. And if somebody publishes with an independent publisher, are they considered self-published or an indie author? That's a very
Yeah.
good twist.
So this is, I think, this is fascinating. This is the etymology of these words,
Mhm.
and I'm going to give you a little bit of history here. I think that I may personally have contributed to some of the confusion around this, so I'm going to try and
Well,
clarify it.
good job.
So prior to self-publishing being an option, really in the early 2000s, there
Mm.
were traditional publishers, and then they called independent publishers. And traditional publishers were referred to as, the big ones: Simon and Schuster, HarperCollins, Hachette, all of those. And independent publishers were imprints that maybe were more genre specific. They were focused on specific genres, and they weren't necessarily based in New York. They could be based anywhere.
Mhm.
And so there's an organization called the Independent Book Publishers Association.
Right.
And then back in around 2007 or 8, I actually wrote a white paper called "The Next Indie Revolution," INDIE.
Mhm.
And in that case, my opening line was first film, then music, now publishing. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to position and get people to see self-publishing is not the bastard stepchild of traditional publishing and what people did if they couldn't get picked up, but it was a phenomenon that had already happened in content creators who were filmmakers and were musicians, and it was
Mhm.
just now happening. And so that title started to get being used. In fact, I was invited. This was years ago. Publishers Weekly had a panel in New York, and I'll never forget this. It was on self-publishing. This was probably like '08, '09, somewhere around there when it was just starting out. And I was on the panel with just a tremendously accomplished, respected traditional publisher. And it was a standing room only crowd. There was probably 150 people crammed in this room because everyone wanted to know what this new phenomenon was. And so they gave each of us opening statements. And if I told you this guy's name, you'd know him. Just great respect for him. And I'm like, why am I on this panel with this guy? But I realized that no one else could talk to. But I had talked about indie publishing. So it came to my opening remarks, and I asked everyone. I said, how many people in this audience have a book to publish? And
Mm.
everyone raised their hand. And I looked at this guy and I said, Bob, how many books are you going to publish this year? He said, probably 10, but maybe 12. I looked back at the audience and I said, if he will offer you a contract, you absolutely should publish with him. He knows exactly what he's doing. If he picks your book, it's going to be
Mm.
a big winner. So you 12 right there, I want you to put your hands down. You're going to work with Bob. Now, the
Mm.
rest of you that have your hands up, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Because what are you going to do? And so you have to make the decision. Are you going to wait for Bob or someone else, or are you going to
Mm.
put your book into the marketplace? And that's how I positioned indie. So independent publishing can be used in 2 different ways in the current environment. Sometimes it speaks to how authors choose to independent publish, but it also can be referred to as an independent publisher, which is why it's confusing. So if you're an indie author,
Mhm.
and I don't have that as my white paper with you, but I mean, I show you the article I wrote.
Mhm.
It was first film, then music, now publishing, the next indie revolution. So indie author refers to someone who chooses not to use a traditional publishing path, but independent publisher can also refer to an independent publisher who's not part of the big four or big five, which is Penguin, Random House, Simon and Schuster. So that's
Mhm.
why that's a great question, but it's also very confusing because it gets used simultaneously. So
Right. Okay. I hope this answered your question, Janice, and we will keep going on to my questions as
yeah.
we move along here. So I have my final question for you, and then we'll open it up for even more questions and answers, folks. And we want to keep it, under the limit. But here we go. So we're talking about what they can look at, what their options are, things to remember and to be aware of. So, what do they need to avoid? What should an author avoid when they're publishing?
So number one, they should avoid uh, having unrealistic goals.
Okay.
So, just don't think that every man, woman, and child on the planet is ready for your book. Have realistic goals. The second thing is that they should avoid um, anyone who makes a promise that sounds too good to be true.
Mm,
It probably is, and unfortunately, and I think the pandemic increase this, but there are scammers out there right now, and I actually do a webinar on how to recognize a publishing scam and avoid it. And I mean,
mm,
honestly, it infuriates me because of my relationship with so many different authors. They show me the things that they're sending. I saw one a couple days ago that an author sent me that this person was saying that they were from Universal Studios and that the film budget was approved, and it looked very realistic. So that would be the other thing: is avoid if it sounds to be too good to be true, it probably is. And then the third thing is you want to avoid justifying putting out a bad book. Like
mm,
just invest, even if it takes you some time. Invest in editing. Use resources that you can access for a good cover. Read, educate yourself.
mhm,
There's so many resources out there. It's going to take time, and I think Joellen, you mentioned patience. Publishing takes patience. If you're going to do a good book, it takes patience, right?
mm,
And
mm.
yeah, yeah, and it's but that's okay. But you want to, because it's your book, and I don't want to be morbid, it's probably going to outlive you, and it's going to travel to places that you will never go. And
Right.
so if it's going to do that, make sure it just represents you as well as you can, and it accomplishes what you can. One of the joys I have is not only doing this to help authors and do things like on the Author Learning Center speaking, but I publish books myself, and I have just so many great stories of a book that I wrote ended up in someone's hands. I had no idea how it got there. And that's one of the great joys of being an author. But I'm glad that I took the time to make sure it's as good as it can be.
I remember I was at the book editing expo or whatever, book expo in New York or whatever. And I met with a lady, and it was really fun because she told the story, and then I went on her website and I could see it, and she'd actually wrote a book and had a great title, absolutely great title, and went in to watch, was it Notting Hill? It was one of those, or
Yeah,
Pretty Lady, whatever it was called, Happy to Crappy, or no, it was Eat, Love, Pray. It was in
right.
that movie, and they're standing there with her book because of the name in the bookstore scene, and I'm thinking, "Wow!" and how
Wow.
great is that? And free, just there. I mean, she literally discovered it while sitting and watching the movie. How
Wow.
awesome is that?
Yeah.
That's my book. That's my name.
Yeah. 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 And
So
and yeah, and books, when you publish a book, if it's a well, if you follow the things that we've been talking about, you 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 create opportunities for yourself that you can never imagine. And just
wow.
two real quick that I'll tell you. So one of the books I did was a children's book, and I did book signings with my daughters because the
Mhm,
book is dedicated to them. Now, as a parent, honestly, I have no idea how many books we sold. So much fun to do that with my
mm,
daughters. Such great
right.
memories. And now we have grandkids, and I'm reading that book to my grandkids, and
Aw.
just watching their little heads try and get their head around, you read this to my mom, but it's just so much fun. The second thing that one of the books I did, it was a request, and it got translated into Italian.
Mm,
and that was really fun. Did unexpected, never like a guy got the copy of a book at a conference he went to in Europe. Never met the guy, never met him in
mm,
person. I was back in Europe for the first time in a few years speaking at this conference, and a guy came up to me. I was speaking on a completely different topic, and he said, "Hey, I read your book."
mhm.
And I said, "Really?" And he had read it in Italian. He didn't even know that there was an English book. He just assumed it was Italian because he was from Italy. And
Of
I just
course.
thought, what great opportunity. And that's why I hope everyone on this podcast will just get to the finish line. Put the best book out there that you can, because it will create opportunities for you that you just cannot even fathom. If you put out a good book, if you put out a bad book, no one's going to pay attention. But put out the best book you can, and it will create opportunities for you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So let's see here. We've got a couple more questions and
Okay.
we will, and if you line them in there, folks, but we're going to run out of time, but we'll do the easy one here. What is the name of Keith's business? And I can answer that one for you. And I'll even put up a little prompt there. Keith, you want to
Yep.
tell us about your business?
Yeah, so the Author Learning Center was created for opportunities like this, and that is because what I believe is writing is a solitary activity, but the journey to being an author shouldn't be. And so the
Hmm.
Author Learning Center, the best way it's been described back to me is it's Netflix meets LinkedIn meets Fitbit for authors. And so we do almost 100 webinars a year. In fact, Joellen, I think you're on the schedule for January, right?
I am, yes, I think
Yeah.
I'm doing this. I do December and then I lap over into
Okay, and then
January. So
December,
I'm
January. So Jellen's gonna be on
the
there. So
meter baby.
we get experts, and we have a book launch tool which helps you track your progress. And then we
Hmm.
have what's called an author circle, so you can create a private online writing group. And so it's 30-day free trial, $9.99 a month. But we have members from 120 countries, and the way we describe it's a GPS for your publishing journey. It helps you get to your goal, and it's been one of the most satisfying things that I've been involved with my whole career, because just seeing people who've struggled to try and find the resources or get the resources they need to get to the goal is just great. And so anyway, so that's what it is.
All right. And we have a question here. This one's for me. Woohoo.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of different types of editing. Can we run through them right quickly? Absolutely here. Oops. Let me bring this up so that just let me remind you that if you want to contact us, we'll definitely we provide free samples so we can take a look at your document and tell you where you are and what we know you need, and then also based upon what your goals are, we can also tell you what level we can provide there. So editing comes from, from high up. You have the developmental structural edit. So like I mentioned earlier, we at First Editing are the first entrepreneurial, or what do you say, we are the first company that is fully certified. All of our editors are Story Coach certified, which means we use artificial intelligence, uh, completely brand new, state of the art software that allows us to go through your document and make sure that we don't miss anything. So you're getting the expert who has all the authority for the editing, and they're doing what's called a Story Coach edit. And basically, they're looking at the 38 story elements. They're looking at your story arc, your plot, your characters, your themes, all those different things, making sure that the concept and the idea is full, that there's nothing missing. Under that, you have content editing, which is when you start getting a little bit more into the syntax. How are you conveying this information? Is it full ideas that are being conveyed? Is it put together in the right way? Now, line editing comes underneath that, and it's a journey. It's not that you do one or the other. You may skip, it's a cha-cha. You can go forward and back depending upon your revisions there and what you add or remove from the manuscript at the time. But the next level would be line editing. And line editing, again, is making sure that your transitions are there, that your statements are supported, that your grammar, spelling, punctuation, of course, is always being looked at, but your flow, your voice, your continuity, your everything sounds like you and continues to be logical and well prepared, but also syntactically, correct from beginning to end there. And then your final level of editing is a copy edit. And this is quite often people say, I need a copy edit. Well, a copy edit is your final level of editing before you go into formatting. So this is when you don't plan on making any more corrections at all. You say, I need a copy edit, means I'm done. And you want to make sure that you're done. And the editor goes, yep, okay. And they go through, and if there's any small things, they correct it, but they're not handing it back with questions or feedback or recommendations on how to change that. Now, this also leaves out proofreading, which people always ask about. And proofreading happens after the formatting. It's technically not editing. It is the final review of what happens when you download, upload, and put in all these formats, which can play with your book in funny ways, and sometimes things go awry. So they're going to go in there and make sure that everything reads correctly, and make sure that your graphics didn't mess things up, that you didn't lose a sentence here or there just because of some glitch in the software. So those are the levels of editing. But again, if you're unsure of where you are in the editing process, my recommendation, either with firstediting.com or whatever editor you are considering, ask them for a sample, ask them for what level of editing they think you need, get a price quote, get a firm delivery time, and of course ask for their references and show where they've succeeded in that. So, and we have all that available online. So, but thank you for that question. So let's see. Oh, now we've got more questions here. Back to you. Let's see. There is a replay. Somebody joining from Aurora. Sunny, welcome from Aurora, Colorado. She's hoping there's a replay. Absolutely. We'll be sending that out. Let's see. Hello from Houston. Was an interesting statement. Surely every author is indie.
That's great. Trying to do a play on words there. That's good.
And then, of course, we have repeat the name, please. And I believe they're asking for the name. And I've got this scrolling along the bottom of the screen, the Author Learning Center. And Keith, you had mentioned that there's a 30-day free trial.
Yep.
It's really cool to go in there. And then it's highly affordable. If you stick around after that, it's only $9.99 a month, right?
Yep.
And able to cancel whenever you like. There was a disbelief here. Keith, you did not know that your book was translated and published in Italian?
No, I did know. I just didn't have time to tell the whole. I didn't have time to tell the whole story. That's a really cool story of how that even came about, right? Someone who I knew. So real quick, someone I knew took the book to a conference, and a guy from Italy took the book back with him. I got an email from him, had never met him, and he said he had gotten the book. I figured out how he got the book, and then he asked if they could translate it into Italian. So there's a whole backstory, but it's just someone took my book and took it with him to Europe, gave it to this guy named Ronaldo, and lo and behold, it ends up being published. And then this past May, I was in Poland at a conference, and this guy came up to me and said, I read your book, and he only had read the Italian version. So again,
Crazy.
No idea. It's not like I'm making money that I can retire from, but how cool is that, right?
Exactly. So we have a question here. I'm wanting to use artwork for my cover and a quote from a movie. Is this public domain or is it permission needed?
It just depends on what quote, what artwork. I mean, there's artwork that's public domain and there's artwork that's not. And so without being very specific, if you work with a supported self-publishing company, a lot of them will give you an opinion on that. If not, you can usually find someone who can give you an opinion if they're a intellectual property lawyer. But it's hard. It's hard to be general about that.
And quotes, of course, you should reference where it came from.
Yeah.
I mean, for everyone's benefit there. We have another one here. Name some names of the supportive self-publishing companies. So they want a little more information there.
Yeah, so there's a range of them. There's supported self-publishing companies that are connected with traditional publishers or genre specific. So there's Hay House, there's Balboa Press, which is associated with Hay House, which is probably the leading mind, body, spirit publisher. There's Archway, which is with Simon and Schuster. There's Westbow, which is connected to HarperCollins Christian, and then if you're in a Christian space, there's also Zulon, which is connected to Salem Media, and then there's trying to think of the other company, and there's a company called Page, which is just kind of a general publisher. So one of the keys, if you're going to work with a supported self-publishing company, two things you want to ask is how long have you been in business, and how many titles have you published? Just because they have 3 testimonials doesn't mean that they're going to be around. And unfortunately, what happens is a lot of these companies, they're like dandelions. They pop up and they go away. And
Mm,
so authors are left holding the bag. So you want to make sure, if I was going to work at a supported self-publishing company, I'd ask 3 questions. How long have you been in business? How many titles have you published? And are you associated with any, traditional publisher or larger company?
mm, mm. Very nice. Okay, we have a question here. Money. What's a realistic budget for a 75,000 genre manuscript?
Oh my goodness. Is the question regarding publishing? Because again,
I'm thinking it's publishing.
yeah, you're editing. So let's assume you bring an edited manuscript. So this does not include editing, and it doesn't include illustrations.
Mm,
So you can usually get published, and by that I mean you get a book in the marketplace. That's a custom design cover in soft cover format. Usually, I copyright and Library of Congress, and then probably an ebook format, and you're probably about a couple $1,000 usually,
mm.
right?
Yeah,
But that doesn't include editing or marketing or any of that.
right.
So
Yeah, and editing is one of the largest investments you make in
it
your
is.
book. So you really need to be prepared there. And again, if you want to send your document in, we'll be glad to give you an instant price quote for the different levels of editing. So that'll be there. Last question, folks, and I'm going to wrap it up because we've been here an hour, and I appreciate your time, Keith. So last question is from Camille, and she asks, where do companies like Tellwell and Friesen Press fall in the spectrum?
So I'll be honest, I've never heard of Tellwell, which makes me a
Mm,
little nervous. Friesen, I think, would probably fall more in the supported self-publishing, but it's been a while since I haven't seen that name in a long time. So I'd have to look at their website, but they're probably closer to a supported self-publishing company. And Tellwell, I've never heard of before.
Right. Well, I do want to remind everyone that we're going to send a free replay after each live webinar, and will contact us if you need that. If you're coming in from one of the different zones that we have here, we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter as we speak. Then, of course, just drop us an email at editors@firstediting, or go over to YouTube and we'll have that available. And I do want to thank Keith Ogorek for coming to us today from Author Learning House, or Authors Learning Center. And making sure that we have all this information about publishing and the 4 paths. And you also have a white paper that we're going to make available, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Absolutely. So again, thank you, folks. Everyone, please subscribe, follow. Remember to check up and sign up for our newsletter. If you follow us on our community at YouTube, we'll be bringing out lots and lots more information, and we'll see you all again very soon. Keith, have a great day, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Joellen. Have a great day. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye.